So, my name is Matthew Griffin. We've got the slides up. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute. So we're a global futures and deep futures advisory organization working up to 50 years out. So my clients include Google, basically where I do a lot of work on the future of artificial intelligence and work, which I still find kind of ironic. Walmart, basically where we're trying to reinvent a 1.4 million employee organization. Pepsi, where we're trying to open up $150 billion worth of new markets in Southeast Asia, and all sorts. As well as sort of companies like Samsung, Huawei. I work across 100 different countries. And what I've really tried to do here is I'm going to try to show you some of the things that, on the one hand, you haven't seen, or I don't think that you've seen. And I'm going to try to show you new perspectives on the things that you have seen. Because when we actually have a look at really today, a lot of us are actually looking at the headlines. And it's very, very tempting as business leaders to look at the headlines and then react to the headlines. Whereas really what we should be trying to do is we should be trying to understand what the future looks like, where the trend lines are actually going, and then responding appropriately. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at seismic shifts. So this is seismic shifts within the retail industry. Reshaping the world, this is where we're going to be having a look at especially political and economic trends as they actually relate to all of us and how they impact us. I'm also going to take an unconventional view of the world. Rather than taking the traditional west-looking east view of the world, I'm going to flip it and we're going to take an east-looking west view of the world because there are some significant changes coming. And then we're going to have a look at a call to action. So when we actually have a look at the future, I kind of often joke that there's only one thing, fortunately, that's changing. It just happens to be everything. I mean, if you have a look at your own businesses, if you have a look at your markets, your consumers, if you have a look at your technology stacks, if you have a look at your own lives, what isn't really changing? Now, it used to be the case that in the 1970s, the United States coined this phrase, VUCA. However, VUCA typically stood for volatile, uncertain, and complex. However, with a lot of the work that I'm doing in the United States at the moment, a lot of leadership teams are saying, well, it's chaotic. And then I kind of turn around and say, well, actually, a lot of that is down to the US, yeah, which is just completely ironic. They go, it's really chaotic. And it's like, yeah, you did that. But it's also ambiguous. But increasingly, we kind of have this MAX acronym because a lot of the changes that we're actually seeing in the world are massive. So we are talking about global system-level changes at the economic, the political, the military perspective, market perspective, and so on and so forth. They're accelerating. So, Linda, you sort of put up the, we typically tend to overestimate what happens in 2 years, and underestimate what happens in 10. I was talking about generative artificial intelligence in 2016, but actually if we look at the past, if you look at the past 6 months, for example, we've seen AI's IQ jump from 136 to 155. So everything is accelerating, but then also the change is exponential. So we typically talk about exponential technologies, so such as artificial intelligence, computer chips, and that sort of stuff. But increasingly, I can change the world at speed. So I can use artificial intelligence to design and develop new products, identify new markets, and then move into those new markets at a speed that is typically unparalleled. And we'll be coming on to that in a bit. Now, when we think about the trends that we're all trying to actually figure out, every single trend that happens anywhere on the planet has a direct and or indirect impact on you and your businesses. So, for example, something that happens in the energy industry will affect you. Something that happens in the transportation, logistics, and supply chain industries will affect you. So overall, I track about 400 megatrends across steep line of business and sector-based trends. And again, everything is changing. Depending where you look, we are transforming each individual industry from the inside out. When you have a look at the disruptors and the accelerator communities, when you have a look at where investors are placing their money, increasingly, all of these are starting to tug on your business. And when you're putting together your visions and strategies for the next 1 year, 2 year, 3, 5, 10, 20 years, This is ultimately what you're trying to figure out. What are the trends that are happening? What are the trends that we care about? What's their impact to us, our business, our consumers, our marketplace, our products and R&D? So when we have a look at the workforce, increasingly the workforce is changing. A lot of the work that I do is on the future of the workforce in an age of artificial intelligence. When we have a look at aviation, we are transporting products basically from A to Z faster than ever before. When we talk about cyber, there are huge cyber changes coming through. When we have a look at energy grids and super grids, increasingly we can import solar energy basically from China. When we have a look at healthcare, we are starting to see the start of longevity. So by 2028, we think we will start having some new technologies that will extend the human lifespan to beyond 100 years. Everything is changing. And ultimately, as business leaders, what you're trying to do is you're trying to see all of these, understand what each one of these actually means, and then what happens when these individual trends combine and converge. So just that alone, and that's not the technology piece, just that alone is difficult in today's environment. So when we have a look at some of the surveys, McKinsey, Mark's favorite, obviously. McKinsey did a little survey a little while ago. So this is about 8 months ago. They went to 14,000 business leaders around the world, and they found that 45% of leadership teams believe that in 10 years, 45% of their companies will be unviable if they aren't making significant changes. Now, anyone that deals with any CEOs knows that when a CEO says that a business is potentially unviable, they're simply switching out the word bankrupt, irrelevant, etc., etc. Thanks to new technologies over the past sort of 5 years, we've seen over $50 trillion worth of value destroyed. So if we have a look, for example, at electric vehicles, Volkswagen's Wolfsburg plant, which is one of the biggest factories in the world, which is fantastic at making internal combustion engine vehicles, is increasingly a depreciated asset. Same when we have a look at BP oil rigs and so on and so forth. So we've seen $50 trillion worth of value destroyed. When we have a look at the boardroom, when we track the FTSE 200 and we have a look at shareholder meetings and notes, we've seen a 20% reduction in the tenure of CEOs. So the average CEO tenure for a large multinational organization is now about 4 years, down from 5 to 6. And part of the reason for that is because CEOs and boards are increasingly finding the world that they're operating in very different and difficult. So I typically say that most businesses are seeing 30% of what's going on and they're missing 70%. But if you're a CEO in the hot seat and you've missed something, then investors and shareholders will say, your results are declining. How come you missed that? And with so much going on, it's very, very easy to miss things. And it's even harder to actually find the correct response to these sorts of things. And then when we have a look at stock market swings, we've seen quite a number of occasions now where in a single day we've had $3 trillion wiped off the stock exchanges in India, the US, across Europe in pretty much next to no time. And then from a disruption perspective, when we have a look at digital technologies, Mark Zuckerberg in 2019 wanted to release his cryptocurrency. And if he'd been able to release his cryptocurrency, it would have turned the global financial markets on their head in 24 hours. And it would have caused problems for the state control of money. So in addition to that, we also see things like whipsaws. You know, when President Trump came into the White House, he signed 24 executive orders. He also rescinded about 55 of Biden's executive orders as well. So just in one day, we can see a huge amount of change that tips the world order on its head. And ultimately, all of this is making business planning, business strategy, vision, the whole lot, execution, almost impossible. Which is why increasingly a lot of organizations today are focused on the what is the headline today? How do we react? It's knee-jerk reactions. And so when we think about long-term vision, strategy, investment, and planning for your businesses, bearing in mind that as businesses you want to grow in the future, you want to put your chess pieces in the right place, basically so that in 5 years' time you are bigger organizations, not smaller organizations. If you don't really know what the future looks like, then it's an increasing gamble on where you put your investments and resources. Now, when we have a look at seismic shifts, this was the traditional consumer journey. It's all being tipped on its head again. Now, from a UK perspective, I don't think that the UK is ambitious enough. And I'll go through why. So when we have a look at search, it used to be the case as businesses, you finally hone your marketing communications, your SEO, your marketing strategy, and so on and so forth. Google, which is where a lot of people would discover you, is increasingly an answer engine. It's not a search engine. If you go onto Google today and you search for something, you'll see AI summaries and AI mode. Increasingly, Google will just say, here's the answer. Now, from an SEO perspective, this is reducing the number of clicks to websites by 34%. However, if your brand is represented in an AI summary, consumers are 4 times more likely to actually buy and convert from you. But just this move away from traditional SEO is a complete mind shift from a consumer perspective, but also from a marketing and communications perspective. And of course, it's natural UI, which is also one of the biggest innovations that we actually have. Now, when we have a look at agentic commerce or agentic retail, so the American clients that I actually work with, we are looking to literally disintermediate absolutely everybody. So this, when we have a look at, for example, Amazon, if I want to buy a mug, I would traditionally go onto Amazon's website, search for a black mug. I would then go on to maybe Sainsbury's website, search for a black mug. Then I would go to different websites. With agentic retail, with things like Amazon Buy Now, I simply use an agentic bot and I say, I would like to buy a black mug. And that looks across all of the different websites like an aggregation engine. And then it says, I found a couple, do you want to buy it? And then the Amazon bot buys it. I am no longer your customer. So agentic retail, which is being rolled out by ChatGPT and OpenAI, by Google, and by lots of different retailers, as well as technology companies, is increasingly disintermediating you. I do not need to go to a Waitrose website, for example, if I'm buying something. The bots find this stuff for me and then they just get it delivered because everything is integrated. Now, when we actually have a look at the discovery process, increasingly that mug that I want to buy is discovered, and I'll come on to this bit later, by your hyper-personal agent. It just simply says, I've found stuff. Now, from a disruptive perspective, we're increasingly seeing the use of synthetic content and artificial intelligence to generate marketing campaigns, adverts, nano-influencer campaigns, and so on and so forth. But this, when we're having a look from east to west, if you want to disintermediate Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or whatever it happens to be, this is all deepfake. So if you think about QVC on steroids, think about the channels basically of how your customers are trying to find you. They'll be on TikTok, they'll be on Instagram, whatever it happens to be. So if we're pumping this kind of content, bearing in mind we can personalize and tailor each message for each person, then at what point is she holding a can of Chinese cola? Say, this is great. So the ability to use artificial intelligence to create actionable marketing campaigns at scale for almost zero cost, and then to push it and distribute it and publish it through any channel that we actually like, disintermediates you. Now, when we actually have a look at things like websites, some of the things that Google are trying to do is increasingly, if you have a photo of something on your e-commerce site, then again, using artificial intelligence, we can take a 2D picture, we can turn it into a 3D render. Now, if we're talking about fashion, I can take that skirt, that dress, that blouse, that whatever, and I can do a live render on your website. So this is where simply using my phone, I can very quickly do virtual try-ons. But also, as we have a look at the agentic AI era, you have the end of apps. So one of my clients is T-Mobile, so Deutsche Telekom. Deutsche Telekom have just formed a partnership with Perplexity AI. You can now buy a phone that doesn't have any applications on it. So if you think about how we, as consumers, are engaging with you as brands, I go to your website, I go to your physical store, I go to your app. But if we're using agentic artificial intelligence and I want to find a product, then I simply type into the box, I'm looking for a black mug. The artificial intelligence bot says I found 3. Pick one, and off we go. So the end of apps causes companies like Google a problem. So they're trying to flip their business models because obviously a lot of ad revenue comes off Google. But when you have a look at Google's ad revenue, it's starting to decline. A lot of their revenue is now starting to come from YouTube. But this is a fundamental switch. I mean, do you really think that Sam Altman, when he launches his new gizmo, gadget or device, do you really think it's going to come with apps pre-installed? It'll have maybe apps in the background that the artificial intelligence draws off, but I won't be clicking your app. And then also choice is an illusion. Because if I'm using an artificial intelligence agent to do my shopping for me, and it simply says, as Linda sort of mentioned earlier, and it says, here are 3 mugs, here are 3 white shirts. Did I really make the choice? Or did the AI show me what it thought it should show me? Or did it show me the products from the people who sponsored the AI? So increasingly, we kind of have this choice is an illusion. So we have so much choice today, it is actually overwhelming. And when we actually have a look at this, 56% of people today are quite happy for artificial intelligence to make the choice for them. I mean, how many of you really want to search through 100 different mug options or whatever it happens to be, different kinds of toilet roll, et cetera, et cetera? Do you have time for that? Is it important? Do you really want to do it? The big purchases, you'll put effort in, but for the smaller, sort of more tactical purchases, if an AI says this is the best thing for you, and the reviews look good, and it looks okay, and the price point's okay, because the AI knows you, and at what point do you just say, yeah, buy that? But even when we actually have a look at the buying process, increasingly with companies like Coinbase, AIs are now able to buy on your behalf. These are called deferred authorization networks, where the AI will buy from other AIs and other sites. Now, if you're Amazon and Walmart, and this is sort of where I say UK ambition is less than what we see in the US, increasingly Walmart and Amazon are now starting to spin up their own cryptocurrency stablecoin payment platforms. So what I now do is when I'm buying a product from Walmart, I'm now buying that product using a Walmart stablecoin. Now this becomes interesting because it disintermediates the ACH, Visa and MasterCard networks, and they no longer have to pay those 1 to 3% commission fees. In addition to that, Walmart and Amazon can actually sell access to the stable coins, and in some cases, if you have a look at Bitcoin, for example, it's what, 500 billion to $1 trillion market at the moment? So this actually also opens up some interesting avenues, basically, for their new financial services products as well. So when we actually have a look at how we're searching, how we're discovering, the choices that we think we're actually making, and then how we buy products, bearing in mind that if the AIs know you really well, they can say, I know who you are, I know where you live, I know your wage and your income bracket, I know your demographics, I've automatically selected the correct finance option for you. Everything's changing. And then, of course, if increasingly AI agents are being used by the consumer to find, source, and buy products, at what point is the human your customer? From a marketing and investment perspective, do you now go to companies like Amazon and say, we will sponsor the Amazon Buy Me Now bot? And we want that to show everything. Which then means that from a marketing perspective, we have branded versus unbranded. The reason increasingly why I am going to come to you and your brand is because I know you and your brand, and I know of you and your brand. The bots will handle all of the unbranded stuff. But if you want to buy a Samsung phone from EE, you will go to EE and you'll buy that. So from a marketing perspective, increasingly, you need to be putting more of your pounds into getting your brand known. Because that's how you move away to a degree from being disintermediated by some of these new technologies. Now, from a reshaping the world perspective, when we kind of have a look at today, we know what's going on today because we can pick up a newspaper. When we think about that planning phase, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, it's tricky. But there is actually a way for us to figure out why the future is going to work in the way that it is. So Bill Clinton said this, and it's actually very accurate. Follow the trend lines, not the headlines. If you follow the headlines, you're in reactive mode, knee-jerk mode. If you follow the trend lines, you still need to pay attention to the headlines, but if you follow the trend lines, you're going to have a much more resilient business in the future. Now, when we have a look at economic trends, and I've sort of been selective, because as I say, I want to show you things I don't necessarily think you see, maybe. These are the constants. So when we think about economic trends, why is the world shaping up the way that it is? All governments care about the balance of trade. So every decision that every government makes is generally aimed at trying to balance trade. So whatever the headline is today, this is the ground truth. This is the constant. Every country wants economic growth. So when you're having a look at some of the new regulations, the policies, tariffs basically that are coming through, they want economic growth. So which countries are really ambitious about economic growth? On price stability, so this affects inflation, cost of living, and so on and so forth, but they also care about productivity. These are the North Stars. When you're designing your vision and your strategy, you're looking for countries that are prioritizing economic growth, for example. And then the headlines are just white noise. But from a headline perspective, when we have a look east to west, it used to be the case that China was the factory of the world. About 35% of all the world's products were made in China. In the 1990s, 35% used to be made in America. But over the past 5 years especially, stretching to a 10, China is now trying to capture much more of the global value chain. Now, we see this happening in a couple of different ways. We've seen this with electric vehicles, where Germany, with their car industry, is saying they now face an existential crisis. The Germans only care about their cars. When everything else was sort of going on, they were sort of like, yeah, affects France, it's a shame. But when you have a look at how China is now trying to take control of the narrative, they are the people who are now designing, manufacturing, and marketing the products. We're going to see a huge number of Chinese brands coming into the market. And increasingly, when we actually have a look at these value chains, during the sort of start of the tariffs, we saw a massive increase in what we call sort of factory to consumer. So in the consumer space, how many of you actually went onto TikTok or Instagram and you saw these factories going, we make the Louis Vuitton bags, and actually they're made really cheaply, and but if you want a Louis Vuitton bag, why buy it off Louis Vuitton? Why not just come to the factory direct? We make Nike shoes and Adidas shoes. Why don't you come to us direct? So when you start thinking about the Chinese sort of approach, they're making the product. They are or aren't designing the product, depends what it is. They are communicating effectively through all of these different channels, basically, that all of us actually have access to, generational sort of differences aside. And increasingly they're saying, like Temu, if you like this product and you want this product, they now have a fully integrated vertical supply chain. So you can buy your Temu product, but the logistics are integrated all the way from Shanghai to London. So when you have a look at how China is starting to move into new markets, it's not just that they say, here's a cheap product. Behind the scenes, companies like Alibaba are saying, we will make it as cost effective as we possibly can for Chinese companies to move product from the Shanghai factory all the way through to wherever it needs to be. So when you think about clothing, for example, when you think about any sort of consumer product, the Chinese are coming. And they're typically at least 30% cheaper than anything that we produce in the West. Always. Now, from an environmental trends perspective, the circular economy always gets mentioned because it has to. One of my clients is Unilever, one of my clients is Dow, another of my clients is Adidas. As a consumer, if you wanted to buy a fully sustainable circular economy product, like the Parley shoes from Adidas, or a product from Unilever that can be infinitely reused and recycled, we've got that. Dow recently spent $6.5 billion building a brand new plastics factory in Saskatchewan. The reason the circular economy still doesn't actually work is because consumers stick most of the stuff in the bin. 8% in Europe, 8% of plastics are recycled, 75% of cardboard is recycled. And the global head of packaging for consumer products at Unilever said to me in Tarragona in Spain a little while ago, he said, we cannot possibly blame consumers for throwing things in the bin. And I was like, well, as Dow, you're spending $6.5 billion on a new plant. As Unilever, you have monomaterials and everything else. And you've made it as simple as possible to recycle these products, and the consumers stick your stuff in the bin. You can blame the consumer. And so despite the fact we've got huge education campaigns in Europe, which have been running since the 1980s, if your consumers stick your products in the bin, in the landfill bin, it's not circular economy. Now, from a packaging perspective, we're doing all sorts of different things. So increasingly, we see a big move to sort of cardboard packaging because it's seen as sort of more premium, it's easier to recycle, et cetera, et cetera. However, from a cellulose perspective, we're now making cellulose from air, and we are making cellulose basically in the lab. So when we start having a look at some of the alternatives to traditional packaging, yes, we've got sort of fungi-based packaging, we've got seaweed and plant-based packaging and everything else. When we have a look at trying to make packaging sustainable, we've done it, provided it goes into the recycling bin. And then from a sustainability perspective, Greta Thunberg a little while ago at one of the COPs said, our house is burning down. You know, when you have a look around at planet Earth, we're smashing temperature records all over the place. So the businesses that I work with, I say, actually, we shouldn't be sustainable. And this is a message I took to COP28. We should regenerate. Because if all of you stopped producing waste, pollution, greenhouse gases and everything else today, the climate would still be running away. So what we would be doing is we would be putting the fire in our house out, but we'd still have a burnt down house. So increasingly, this is where we look to regenerate the biosphere and elephants. Elephants like regeneration. Sustainability helps an elephant. You don't destroy any more of its habitat, but regeneration, elephants like that. And then, of course, zero. Now, on this one, I could talk about net zero. When we have a look at some of the European regulations that are coming through, they want zero impact, zero harm, and zero waste. So we're seeing about 300 new policies coming through from Brussels. But in this particular case, yes, net zero is a good thing. However, think about your cost of energy as businesses. If your businesses are fueled from a traditional gas-fired peaker plant, which about 30% of UK energy comes from those, your cost of electricity is $110 per megawatt hour. If as a business your electricity is coming in Europe from solar or wind, then it's $40 per megawatt hour. And in China, the cost of electricity from their renewable sources, because they're operating at scale, is $20 per megawatt hour. So what this basically means is you could have exactly the same facilities, buildings, factories and everything else in the UK, in the US, and over in China, and they would be cheaper to run from an energy basis in China. They would then be the next cheapest would be in Europe and the UK. And because America is doing drill, baby, drill, that's at $110 per megawatt hour, which means that Trump's attempt to re-onshore manufacturing in the US, his prices are going to be up here, China prices and Europe prices are going to be down here. So as Trump and other world leaders say, cheap energy helps drive the economy. From a geopolitical trends, what do politicians want? When you have a look at what the politicians are doing, what the governments are doing, what do they actually want? What's the constant? They want control. They want GDP growth. Think about what Trump's doing. Control, GDP growth, national security, which can also be used as a way to beat you over the head if we just don't want you to play with us. Political survival, and they want power. So when you're thinking about your business vision and strategy and investments, how do the countries that you are interested in doing more business in think about these? Now, increasingly, we're seeing global decoupling. You know, Mark and I were having a chat earlier by seeing increasingly the United States is becoming an island. When you think about Latin America, Latin America's primary trading relationships used to be with the USA. Now all their primary trading relationships are with China. Same with Africa. So what we're seeing is we are seeing global decoupling, but this actually matters from a brand perspective, because if you're a company like Coca-Cola and you are trying to move into the Chinese market, if you are seen as an American brand, guess what? You're not going to sell much. So with companies like Pepsi, for example, we are re-envisioning Pepsi as a global brand, not as an American-centric brand. Same with Disney. But the world is splitting, and it's splitting along these cultural, economic, ideological, political, and technological lines. So increasingly, from a technology perspective, if you are running a mixed Western and Chinese technology stack in your businesses, governments want you to get rid of the Chinese technology out of your cloud farms. So the world is splitting. From an economic perspective, we see that with de-dollarization. From a cultural perspective, we actually see, for example, China, North Korea, Iran, Russia actually aligning. We see the BRICS aligning. I mean, when you actually think about what the US is doing, Brazil were going to be hit with 50% tariffs, and Luma basically simply went back to the US and said, you represent 1.3% of our imports. As America, you are irrelevant to us. Hello, China. So there is a huge global shift going on, but the reason why the world is regrouping is because we're moving from a hegemony to a bipolar and multipolar world. What is the US trying to do? It's trying to maintain control as the dominant political, cultural, and economic economy on the planet. Tariff complexity. This is what you're having to deal with. This is the daily headline. We're seeing primary tariffs, we know those. We're seeing secondary and sector-based tariffs coming through. Corporate tariffs. So a sector tariff is, if we're importing semiconductors, you're hit with a 30% tariff. Corporate tariffs, if you're Apple, we're going to hit you with a 30% tariff. So this is a huge amount of uncertainty. We're also seeing the United States make heavy use of blacklists and sanctions, which is causing chaos. However, from this perspective, bearing in mind the United States updates their custom lists very regularly, if you're using an artificial intelligence to analyze basically all these tariff movements, then as a business, you can very, very quickly, almost in real time, understand the impact of tariffs on your business and your supply chains at a granular level. And these probably aren't going away. Why? Because the US is trying to maintain control. They want to suppress China. They want to be the dominant economy. And then when we have a look at Europe, Europe's kind of in this malaise. You know, we just saw 15% tariffs on imports to the US. Why? Europe has relied on China for manufacturing for 20 years, 25 years, and has relied on the US for the technology stack. I do a lot of work in Brussels, and the Europeans, basically for quite a long time now, have simply said, yeah, we're not the dominant force that we think we are. From a UK perspective, though, actually UK is looking increasingly relevant, which is interesting. So actually the UK, as I travel around the world, is being talked about more favourably in terms. But until Europe can get its house in order and can start having a reason to be at the bargaining table, and it's got a big stick to beat other countries with, they're going to be essentially the second-rate economy of the world. Now, from a societal trends perspective, again, what are the constants? What are we tracking? So again, like Linda sort of mentioned, what are our basic needs? We're always going to need toilet paper and we're going to need food. Consumers are generally always going to like convenience. Generally, they're going to care about ethics and trust. I will buy from your brand because I trust your brand. I mean, how many of you would buy from a brand you don't trust? Now, trying to figure out if you can trust that brand for your first purchase, that's difficult. That's marketing, that's reviews, etc., etc. And value. I don't necessarily mind paying more for things, but I want value. And that's going to be the case moving forward. Now, from a hyper-personal perspective, earlier I mentioned that we are increasingly going to see hyper-personal agents, AI agents, doing the buying for us if the American tech giants get their way. This is Sam Altman's quote. Now think about hyper-personalization in your businesses. You've got your data, you've got your internal and external data sets. You're mashing it together to learn as much as you can about your consumers. Sam Altman, and this is ChatGPT, and it's doing it to you right now, AI will remember your entire life. This is what we call in technology terms a context window. So AI will remember what you told it 2 years ago. It'll remember what you say to it in 10 years' time. And from that, it will build up a picture of your entire life. But not just you, everyone that's using it. Did you know that that is how many data points artificial intelligence is gathering on you? 165,000. 30 demographic data points, 500 emotional data points, social graphs, search and content consumption, micro inferences, the way that you type, the way you hold your phone. If you're holding your phone like this, the AI can tell because there are sensors in your phone that says, Matt's got a hump, basically, and he's probably a bit upset. The way that you talk, the speed at which you type suggests whether you are happy or sad. The number of times you pick up your phone suggests you're happy or sad, etc. Long-term traits. 3 years ago, you were searching for the same car that you're looking for now. What if I could make it possible for you to buy that car? Health and wellness. These wearables. Hey Matt, basically I've noticed you're dehydrated, etc. You're always on the move. Your GPS looks nuts. Behavioral. So if I gather 165,000 data points on you, I can get intensely granular. Now you start imagining these data points being owned by American companies that are using it to serve you content or to surface products. And all of a sudden you've got a very, very powerful set of companies that now know your consumer and your customers much, much better than you do. And they have the technology and the scale to disintermediate you. Now, from a cost of living perspective in the UK, over the last quarter, the average UK household has 513 in disposable income. And that's a 25% decline over the last quarter. 75% of UK consumers are now spending, UK consumers are now spending 75% of their wages on essential purchases. This is the cost of living sort of increase that we've seen. But when we have a look at the average UK household debt, it's down from 148% in 2008 to 117%. So actually from a financial position, actually in the UK, from a household to debt ratio, we're actually doing better than pretty much every other G20 economy. But this picture here says that finances are under stress. So again, consumers are looking for value. Loneliness epidemic, and there is a reason I'm putting these in here. We keep finding in survey after survey of hundreds of thousands of UK adults that 50% of UK adults feel lonely sometimes. A quarter of adults feel lonely often or always. Depression has doubled since 2020. Now, why is this important? You are brands. You want people to come to you. You want to show people your purpose, your values, and everything else. These are the top 3 use cases of all of the major artificial intelligence models in 2025. People are searching for companionship, life organization, and finding a purpose. How do any of your brands help people with those? So, for example, as companies start automating more, at what point should you actually start leaning in and hiring more people? When we talk about purpose, how many people really actually understand the purpose of your brand? Patagonia was a good example where people got behind the purpose of that brand, which was sustainability. And then from technology trends perspective, again, what are the constants? Increasingly, AI especially is getting its own agency. So it's now increasingly not automated, it's becoming more autonomous. Automation will continue to be a trend. Does anyone think that we are going to be automating less stuff in the future? It doesn't matter what the AI is, whether it's a ChatGPT, an Anthropic, a Google Gemini. Increasingly, AI will get more agency, more power. It will become more cost performant. So think less about the individual technologies that you're looking at and think more about what are they. Technology will be more pervasive. We're going to use more of it. And it's going to have more utility. So again, these are the constants. So when you're planning your tech stacks, your markets, your investments and everything else, this is where we're headed. The rest is, well, do you use that AI or that AI? Now, Sam Altman and Microsoft have defined artificial general intelligence, which is an AI that has an IQ of 1600 and which is already starting to emerge, as an AI that can generate $100 billion in profits by itself. Or an AI that is capable of outperforming all humans at all economically valuable work. So increasingly, we are starting to see AIs that are starting to build their own companies. So we are no longer, from a technology perspective, doing digital. You know, if you think about your technology stacks, your digital transformation programs, that's nice, that's cute. Increasingly, as you take information into your business, as it's analyzed by an AI, as that AI is given the ability to act on your behalf, and you give it agency, you are undergoing intelligence transformations. An intelligence transformation of your business is fundamentally different to a digital transformation of your business. Different partners, different approach, different investments. And also, we're moving from automated, if this happens, do that, to autonomous. Again, autonomous is very different to automated. Increasingly, it's the AIs that are making the decision on, we see this customer, this is how I behave, this is what we serve them. And everything moves to autonomous. So we're seeing marketing communications basically moving to fully autonomous. 2 of my clients are Dentsu and WPP, and 5 years ago I was telling them that we were going here, and they were like, yep. And now they're like, bugger, our entire business is being undermined. Operations moving to autonomous, logistics moving to autonomous, so autonomous supply chains. We're doing this with DP World and others. Research and development, AI is increasingly creating products, and we have autonomous supply chains coming through. And then you won't like this one. So I do a lot of work with the UK national security community and GCHQ. 6 months ago, we saw the first fully autonomous cyber weapons. So any of you that have been hit by ransomware, that's nothing. So AI is increasingly able to understand what your technology stack looks like. It analyzes it, it creates the exploits, the malware, the ransomware, and it goes and penetrates your systems and takes you down. We have defenses, but we don't have the time to talk through the defenses. And then from a technology perspective, AI that we all talk about is there. I track over 600 emerging technologies, and all of these different technologies transform either one thing about an industry or everything about an industry. So bioreactors, for example, increasingly we can make cellular agriculture-based meat. So we are making cellulose for packaging using a bioreactor. We're making meat in bioreactors. We're making cotton in bioreactors. You want cotton that's bought from a lab, not bought from the Urga fields, basically in northwest China. We can do that here. When we have a look at compute, we're moving to quantum. So from a quantum perspective, companies like BMW are using quantum computers already to optimize global supply chains, very complex global supply chains, and optimize them. When we look at connectivity, we're moving to 5G and 6G, but we're also moving to low Earth orbit satellite systems. So low Earth orbit satellite systems connect the rest of the planet. That doubles your market opportunity. Energy, tons of different energies going on. AI, we've talked a little bit about AI. When we have a look at materials, we've got all kinds of new materials to help us be more sustainable. General purpose robotics. So when we actually have a look at factories, increasingly with companies like Xiaomi, we have dark factories. Amazon is trying to create a dark warehouse. So we've already seen Foxconn developing dark warehouses as well. So dark warehouses, when you think about the operational costs, those are much, much lower. Those are warehouses that have no people. From a security perspective, we've got lots of different things coming through, including fully autonomous defense, cyber defense systems, user experiences. We used to talk about the metaverse, that's sort of gone away, but increasingly we're talking about these. We've been talking about personal digital assistants for about 15 years. That's your AI agent. So you've got all this sort of stuff going on. 3D printing, Adidas basically 3D prints trainers in the back of their stores so they eliminate all inventory. And so from a call to action perspective, unlearn everything you know. Today does not work the way that the past used to, and the future doesn't work the way basically that today works. You've got to be able to move at speed. I mean, if you have a look just at the rate of AI development, for example, the one you use today will be different to the one that you use tomorrow. They will be superior. I mean, we just saw GPT-5 being released. GPT-5 cost $500 billion to train, $500 million to train. Align, don't look at the headlines. Look at the trend lines. If America wants to be the dominant economy, then what will it do to remain the dominant economy? Diminish basically means look at the risks across your business, like, for example, tariffs. How would you diminish the risks that harm your business? So, for example, with tariffs, you could use an artificial intelligence to analyze tariffs, their impact, and automatically update all of your systems in real time. And then finally, decouple. So decouple from the things that are actually irrelevant to your business moving forward. Just get rid of it, because there is stuff that's going to be complex. And then diversify. The American tech giants diversify like crazy. This is why they are coming into your market, but how many of you are going into their market? If you create a simple super app, for example, then you can be selling groceries along with insurance, along with financial services products and everything else. You are more resilient to shocks. And that is it from me. So time is up. Thank you very much for listening.